Sotah Daf Mem Aleph begins with the Gemara's conclusion of the discussion of the Kriyas HaTorah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Talk a little bit more about the tefillas that he has on Yom Kippur. Then we'll introduce the last mission of the Perek, which teaches us about Kriyas Hakel that the king reads on the Sukkot of the year after Shemitah. So let's begin. The Gemara has been discussing the Kriyas HaTorah in Parshas Achar Mois, and then it said he reads from Ach Ba'osar, which is in Parshas Emor. So the Gemara says, how is it possible that you skip forward in the Torah? We have a halacha, we have a brayso that says you're allowed to skip in the Navi, but you're not allowed to skip in the Torah. So Abaye person wants to say, the only time you're restricted to skipping in the Navi and not in the Torah is if it's such a long skip that the Maturgamon, the one who translates after you read, is going to finish and we're going to have to wait for you. There you're allowed to skip in the Navi, but not in the Torah. However, if it's a short enough skip that the Maturgamon will still be speaking by the time you're ready to go, then you're allowed to skip even in the Torah itself. So the Gemara says that's not correct, because we have a brayso that says clearly that you're allowed to skip in the Navi, you're not allowed to skip in the Torah, and even in the Navi you're only allowed to skip within that amount that you'll be up to the next place by the time the Turguman is finished speaking. But in the Torah, that implies that even in that situation you are not allowed to skip. So then how could you be allowed to skip here from Parshas Achar Mois ahead to Ach Ba'asar? So Abaye therefore changes his answer and he says the difference is whether you're skipping within one inyan or you're skipping from one inyan to the next inyan. We have a brayso that supports this. In the Torah it says you're allowed to skip within one inyan. And in the Navi you're allowed to skip even from one inyan to the next inyan, as long as, in both circumstances, as long as the skip will be finished by the time the Turguman is finished speaking. Now, therefore you see support for this halacha, and therefore here when he's skipping within the parsha of the Avodah of Yom Kippur, it's not a problem to skip forwards. Now, the brayso there continues and says you're not allowed to skip from one Sefer Navi to another Navi. Within the Sefer Trei Asar, you're allowed to skip from one particular from one of the 12 within Trei Asar, it's all called one Sefer. You're allowed to skip, but you're just not allowed to go backwards. Not allowed to skip backwards to something earlier. You're only allowed to skip forwards. Okay, the Gemara moves on. We've seen in our Mishnah that the Kohen rolls the Torah, holds it, and then he says more than what I said is written here, and then he begins to recite from Sefer Bamidbar out loud. So why does he have to say that? Why does he have to say more than what I read to you is written here? So the Gemara says in order that people shouldn't think that it's not written there, in order that people shouldn't think that the reason why he's rolling it up is because the Sefer Torah is missing. It will be laws on the Sefer Torah. Now, then he recites Baal Peh from Chumash Pikudim from Sefer Bamidbar, where it says Uva Asar, from Parshas Pinchas. Now, the Gemara says, why doesn't he just roll the Sefer Torah up to there? Why does he have to read Baal Peh? So Huna Bar Yehuda says, you're not allowed to roll the Sefer Torah but tzibor. It's a design to the tzibor that they should sit and wait while you roll the Torah. So Gemara says, why don't you bring another Sefer Torah? So Rav Huna Bar Yehuda says, because if you bring another Sefer Torah, it seems to show that there's something wrong with the first Sefer Torah. It'll be a pagam on the first Sefer Torah. Rish Lakish says, because you're not allowed to make another bracha. If you're going to take a new Sefer Torah out, you have to make another bracha on it. It'll be a bracha she'en tzricha, because you already made a bracha. So why should you take out another Sefer Torah? So when I asked that Rav Yitzchak Nachla had said, the Gemara asks, is it true that you don't take out another Sefer Torah because you're afraid that it'll show that there's a pagam, something missing in the first Sefer Torah? Can't be, because sometimes we even bring out up to 3 Sefer Torah. Yitzchak Nachla said, Rosh Chodesh Teves, which is Chanukah, which falls on Shabbos. You take out 3 Sefer Torah. One you read the Parsha of the week, one you read Rosh Chodesh, and one you read Chanukah. So therefore there's no problem of pagam. So Gemara answers no. The one over there, you have 3 different people reading. If 3 different people reading 3 different oilam, you could have 3 different Sefer Torah. Here you have one person and only one oila, and if he's going to go switch to a different Sefer Torah, that shows that there's a pagam, something wrong, there's a mistake in the first one. Okay. Next, we've seen in our mission that he says 8 brachas. The Gemara quotes a brayso that says he makes the bracha ala Torah, like they say in Shul, the same bracha we say on the Torah. Then he makes a bracha ala Havayda, on the Haidah, a bracha on Mechilas Avain, that as it's metoken in the Mikdash, Bifnei Atzmai by itself, and then for the Kehanim for themselves, for Yisrael for themselves, and in Yerushalayim all for themselves. Then he says the tefillah. So what's the tefillah? So the Gemara quotes the brayso again. It's a tefillah tchina rino bakasha, that Amcha Yisrael tzrichen leivasha, that your people Yisrael need to be saved, and he ends off with Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah. After that, says the Gemara, each person would bring their own Sefer Torah from their house. Either he held that you're allowed to carry on Yom Kippur, or he held that Yerushalayim is an Erev, the gates are shut, and each bring their own Sefer Torah and they read from it. And the reason is to show the beauty of the Sefer Torah to the Rabbim, the public. Now we begin the next Mishnah, which discusses the Kriya of Hakel. So the Mishnah says, Hakel was the king, took the Sefer Torah and he read, how did it go? So he said on Motzei, the end of the first day of the Yontif of Sukkot, on the 8th, the Mishnah implies the 8th day, which doesn't fit because we just said Motzei Yom Tov Rishon. The Gemara explains that it's the 8th year, so it's Motzei Shvis. It's the year after a Shemitah year. So they would make a wooden bima in the Azara, and he would sit near it, and like it says, Meketz Sheva Shana b'Moyed, and that's when he would do Hakel. Now, what happened? So the Chazan HaKnesses, the Gabbai, the Shamish, who was responsible to run everything, he took the Sefer Torah from the storage and he gave it to the Rosh HaKnesses, that's like the Gabbai, who was in charge of everything. And the Rosh HaKnesses gave it to the Skan, the assistant to the Kohen, who was appointed in case something happened to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol took it from the Skan and he gave it to the king. The king stood up and he was mekabelit and he read seated. Now Agrippa HaMelech, he was mekabelit standing and he read standing. He did not sit, and the Chachamim praised him for that. Now Agrippa was a descendant of Hordus, who was a guy. However, his mother was Jewish and he was a Melech Yisrael. However, when he got to the pasuk which said, ish nachri, you cannot have a stranger be your king, so his eyes flowed with tears because that pasuk showed that he was a puzzle to be the king. But everybody said, don't be afraid, Agrippa, you're our brother, and they meant because his mother was Israel. Now, he read the entire Chumash Devarim, but not in order. He read from the beginning, Eila Dvarim, until Shema. Then he skipped to the next Shema and V'hayim Shemaya. He read that. Then he skipped to Aser, Ki Techala Aser, and that's because he wanted to highlight the time of Ma'aser, which was then. Then he went back and he read Parshas HaMelech, which is between Shema and V'hayim Shemaya. It discusses the parsha of creating a king, and then he skipped forward and read the brachos and the klalos until he finished the entire parsha. And the Rishonim discuss why there's no problem here of skipping in a Sefer Torah. Now, after he finished, he said brachos. All the brachos that the Kohen Gadol said, he said as well, except that he, instead of saying a bracha of Mechilas Avon, he said the bracha Al Yisrael V'Azmanim on the Yontif of Sukkot. We now begin the Gemara, which discusses the Mishnah and then gets into the midah of Chanufa, flattery to wicked people, and how terrible that is. So let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara says, is it true that it was on the 8th day of the Yontif, Bashmini? But it wasn't. It was on the first day, the end of the first day of Yontif. The Gemara says, so it has to be Bashminis, meaning the 8th year. Now, the pasuk describes it very carefully. It says a lot of words. It says, Miketz Shnas HaShmita B'chag HaSukkos B'moyed. Why do you have to say all that? You have to say the 8th, and the end of Shemitah, on Sukkot, on the Moyed. What's all this for? Someone says we have to specify a lot of things. If you would have only said the 8th, we would have thought you counted 8 years from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking, which was not 8 years from that, because that was not a Shemitah year. So therefore, it had to say that it has to be on a Shemitah, meaning the 8th year of the Shemitah cycle. And if it would only have said Shemitah, you would have thought it was at the end of Shemitah, not by Sukkot. Therefore, it has to say B'moed. And if it would only say B'moed, you would think that that could even refer to Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, it has to say B'chag HaSukkos. And if it only said B'chag HaSukkos, you would think even on the last day of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeres, and therefore it has to say B'vay Kol Yisrael, when all Kol Yisrael come, meaning when they first arrive, the first day of Sukkot. Next, the Mishnah said that the Chazan of the Knesset gives it to the Rosh HaKnesses, who gives it to the Skan and all that. So you see that you give covet to each of them in front of the king. So you see that you do give covet to a Talmud in front of the king. Same thing we said earlier. So I gives the same answer as we said earlier. Rabbi says it's not that you're being mechabed the Talmidim here in front of the greater person, but you're being mechabed the king by showing all the steps of covet that there are to get to him. Next, the Melech receives them and he reads it in a seated position, but Agrippa stood. So the Gemara says, you see that everyone else could sit and then they stand to receive it, but how are they allowed to sit? Only Malchos Beis David are allowed to sit in the Azar, like it says, V'yavi HaMelech David V'yeshev L'fnei Hashem. All the other people are not. So other kings like Malchos Beis Chashmonai, how are they allowed to sit? So Rav Chisda said in the Ezra's Nashim, just like we said about the Kohen Gadol was in the Ezra's Nashim, this is also in the Ezra's Nashim, and therefore they were allowed to sit in the Ezra's Nashim. Next, we saw that Agrippas stood and the Chachamim praised him. So Gemara says that seems to imply that he did right, but it shouldn't be right because a king is not allowed to forego his honor. It says, a president, a leader, who's Michael his covet works, but a king who's Michael his covet does not work. He has to keep his covet. So why was he allowed to stand and be Michael on the covet that he deserves the right to sit? So the Gemara says, the proof that a king is not allowed to be Michael on his covet is Saim Tasam Malacha Melech. He has to put a king upon you. His fear and his awe have to be upon you. He has no right to forego it. So when answers for a mitzvah, it's different. He's being mechabed, the mitzvah is allowed. Next, when we got up to the part where the Torah says that the king has to be from Klal Yisrael and not a foreigner, so he cried, and they all said, Achinu ata, Achinu ata. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Nosson said at that time, Klal Yisrael, the Gemara speaks in a obfuscation. It says those who hate Yisrael, but it's referring to Yisrael. So they became obligated in destruction because they did Chanufa. They flattered Agrippas. They made it sound as if he was a roy to be the king, even though his father was a guy. It's not true. So Shimon ben Chalafta says, from the time that the scourge of flattery increases, all the rules are perverted, the dinim are nisavu, and all the actions are destroyed, and a person can no longer say, my deeds are greater than yours, because everybody gets messed up, because even the great people see that no one's looking over their shoulder, and no one's going to say anything bad to them, because they're all in awe of them, and therefore everybody ends up doing wrong. Says Rav Yehuda bar Ma'arava, a drasha, some say it was Rav Shimon ben Pazi who said it. He says it's permitted to do chanifa to Rishayim in this world. You're allowed to flatter the wicked people. Why? So there are two sources. One is it says lo yikari oid le naval nadiv l'chila lo yamar shaya, that when Mashiach will come, we will no longer flatter people, which implies that in this world you are allowed to flatter people. That's one source. Rav Shimon ben Lakish says you get it actually from the interaction of Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov said to Esav, "Kirois pnei Elokim atirtzeni." I saw you as pnei Elokim. I saw you as the face of a master or of a god even. So why do you call Esav pnei Elokim? That was chanufa. That was flattery. So Gemara says that interpretation is disputed by Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says Yaakov is not flattering him. Yaakov is trying to get him to stop from killing him. It's like an example. If you think about someone who invites his friend, and then he sees that he intends to kill him, and then he says, "Oh, this soup that I'm eating here, it tastes like the soup that I had in the king's house." He's name dropping to show that he's friends with the king, in order that this person should not kill him. He should be afraid of him. So that's what Yaakov was doing. He was name dropping, saying, "Oh, I saw Pnei Elokim. You look like Pnei